Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and they have snuck a sweet little surprise in today. A spooky surprise of a new Deck of Fates event. And this is the Jester Deck of Fates. Now, it is Halloween events. This is what we're all celebrating here in Raid. So naturally, we got to collect some pumpkins. Now, I always do a little bit of intro here. If you've never done a Deck of Fates event before, the way that it works is you have 40 cards arranged in a grid layout. It costs you 1,000 pumpkins to turn the card. Behind each card, there is a set of rewards. Now, what makes this Deck of Fates specifically unique is there is a champion that exists behind the cards. Now, the problem with Deck of Fates is you don't know where these rewards sit in this grid. So some people will come in here and go, do you know what? I'm going to pull the top right corner, the bottom left corner, the middle corner, and there you go. I've got like 75 fragments for this new champion. Some people might have to go the full 40,000 in order to get it. But what it does mean is if you unlock every single card, you will walk away with a guaranteed Kaja. Now, Kaja is the pairing to the Timit the Fool fusion. So if you have the two of them together, it makes both of them very strong. We'll have a look at the pairing in a moment. What else can we get available here? We can also get a legendary book. We can get 1,000 energy, 60 gems, and then everything else. I mean, there's a 5-star chicken in a barrel, but everything else is pretty mediocre. What makes Deck of Fate specifically unique is this 3 in a row concept. So if you flip a card, each card has a type of rarity. That is a common, rare, or epic. If you flip 3 of the same rarity, you'll get yourself one of these rewards depending on the rarity. So if you flip 3 of the green, you could get yourself 100 gems. You could get yourself 3 mortal soul stones. You could get yourself 300 energy. These aren't terrible rewards. In actuality, these are where the rewards make this event very efficient. You know, if you pull a purple, you could potentially get yourself an eternal soul stone. That's months of farming. You could get yourself a mythical tome. We're seeing more and more the mythical tomes are acquirable from events. They're getting a little bit more accessible. They're still pretty inaccessible, but they're getting there. And the good thing is they haven't replaced anything bad. They've actually replaced the chaos ore here with the mythical tome. I always felt it was pretty awkward getting a barrel or a chaos ore when you pull the epics, because those things didn't really equate to the same value as an eternal soul stone or a legendary book. I would even say 1,000 energy compared to these rewards is quite weak. A legendary book normally sits at the end of a champion training tournament, and that is at least 2,000 energy that you have to pump in order to do that. So 1,000 energy doesn't really translate to the same value as everything else, but at least energy is useful. Whereas I think some of the rewards in the past, like the barrel or the 6-star chaos legendary ore, is useful in a very isolated niche scenario. It's not very usable universally. So these rewards are pretty good. Now, let's talk about some of the shady things that exists within this particular Deck of Fates. Normally, there are 10 epic cards. Last Deck of Fates, there was 9. This Deck of Fates, they've put 6. So they have essentially nuked the chances of you getting one of the really, really good 3 in a rows, right? The chances of you getting 3 in a row now exists in 2 opportunities only. So if you pull 1 epic and then you pull a rare, you've only got 1 possible chance of being able to pull 3 in a row. So it's a little bit shady. It does dramatically reduce the odds of you getting 3 epics in a row. We'll kind of have a look at that in a minute. And they've put them all into common cards as well, not into the rare cards. So that really kind of is a bit shady. I'm not really happy with that, but it is what it is, I guess. The other thing that they have done is they have pretty much forced you down the summoning route, because normally you'd get about 55 pumpkins for this rank 6 mythical. You're only getting 31. On average, across the board, they have taken 44 to 47% of the points out of the Dungeon Divers component of this event. There's 2 ways you can get pumpkins: summon shards or do Dungeon Divers, get artifacts. You're not really going to be able to do it from get artifacts. You're going to get a small amount at best. The way they want you to do this event is summoning shards. So how many is that going to be? We're going to have a look in a minute. Let's just first have a look as to whether or not this pairing is worth it. I'm going to have a dedicated video coming out after this video on Timit the Fool, what my thoughts are. It seems to be that most people don't like Timit the Fool. I have a different opinion, so we're going to do a bit of a discussion on that in a dedicated video. Otherwise, this video is going to be incredibly long. But let's just have a look at the Kaja the Wry. This is the champion that you can get in this Deck of Fates. It's kind of like, the way I look at this champion is, if you don't have Duchess, this is a very good alternative if you're going to get the Timit the Fool. Now, why do I say that? He has got a A2, ironically an A2. I don't think I've seen that many A2 revives, but there you go. An A2 revive all dead allies with 50% HP and 50% turn meter. This is actually better than Duchess's revive, because Duchess doesn't revive with any turn meter, but it is not better than some of the other AoE revivers. Like Pythian is probably a slightly better AoE reviver because you get the strengthen with it. Champions that revive like Uka with a block damage, so it gives you more opportunities to take a turn. When you revive with Kaja the Wry, you're going to place an increased crit rate and an increased crit damage on all the revived allies for 2 turns. Now here's the pairing. If Timit the Fool is on the same team and he is dead, he gets a full HP and full turn meter. Now, full turn meter doesn't guarantee that they're going to get a turn. It probably just means that they get 100% of a turn meter. So if an enemy is on 120% turn meter, they'll still go before Timit the Fool. This is kind of what happens with Wukong. When Wukong revives with his passive, he doesn't guarantee he gets a turn because it depends on where everyone's turn meters are at. It only gives them 100% or 100 units of a turn meter. If Timit the Fool is on the same team and alive, it resets the cooldown and instantly activates their Kegs of Dread skill. Okay, so what skill is that? That is the A3. So he attacks all enemies. Before attacking, places an increased accuracy and then places a true fear on all enemies for 1 turn. It is a HP-based nuke, so it's not crazy. I think the math works out something like 0.29. So it's like 1 hit of a Magna A2, maybe a little bit stronger. It's okay, so it's not going to like one-shot. You can't use it as like a one-shot strategy, but it will definitely be quite good. What it basically means is the revive is actually increased crit rate, increased crit damage, and increased accuracy, and an AoE true fear when a revive happens. Essentially, that is what is going to happen, so long as he doesn't get himself polymorphed and enemies don't have block debuffs and a bunch of other details. So that's a pretty good pairing, assuming that Timit the Fool is still alive. As a HP-based champion, there's a very strong possibility that Timit the Fool might still be alive. And he also then get a full AoE revive on a 4-turn cooldown. What else does Kaja have? The A1 attacks one enemy, heals this champion by 10%. If any Timits, I don't know why the S is not in the same color, it's a bit weird, it's off-putting. If any Timits are on the same team, heals all of them by the same amount. Okay, so it's an okay A1, basically keeps Timit alive a little bit longer. And then A3 fills the turn meter of all allies by 20% on a 3-turn cooldown. Okay, it's pretty good. Also removes 2 random debuffs from each ally. If Timit the Fool is on the same team, it does an AoE cleanse. Okay, so if Timit's here, this becomes a 20% fill, removes all debuffs, and places a block debuffs. Timit makes that ability a lot stronger because it's a very high possibility you could have more than 2 debuffs. But in Hydra places or in Clan Boss, you'll only have 1 debuff, so it's not so valuable. But in PvP, there's a more likelihood maybe. If you have got sort of things like petrification with decreased defense weaken or something of that nature, there's value to be had there in making Timit work in this team. Then we get the passive. All turn meter reduction effects are decreased by 50% when used against this champion. So that means if you try to drop this champion's turn meter by 10%, instead it will drop it by 5%. This is kind of like a little bit what Archmage Helmet does, but he's completely immune, so you can't drop his turn meter. However, if Timit the Fool is on the same team, this champion is immune to turn meter reductions, and if an enemy tries to decrease this champion's turn meter when Timit the Fool is on the same team, he gets that turn, or he or she gets that turn meter instead. Okay, so that is really powerful. So Timit, this is what you tend to find with champion pairings. Individually, this champion is an AoE revive with an AoE turn meter fill, AoE cleanse, and AoE block debuffs, and a single target self-heal. It's actually quite good. But when Timit becomes part of the team, you get a lot more potency, and this passive actually becomes probably quite strong, because if you try to drop this enemy's turn meter by 30%, you instead give 30% turn meter to this champion. There's also a 19% aura. 112 base speed, very fast, good base HP, good base defense. It is designed to be replacing your reviver in your arena team, alongside Timit the Fool, who is designed to be like a debuff remover or a damage dealer. Now, if we look at what Timit the Fool gets from being paired with Kaja, we always get an extra turn, even if there are enemy buffs. So that allows you to run a double nuke strategy, right? This allows you to get around the fact that his HP base doesn't deal enough damage by running this into this. So you'd open with this ability, get yourself a guaranteed extra turn, and then you'd run your Kegs of Dread to get yourself another AoE. So you get 2 AoEs. They are on a bit of a long cooldown. We're talking 4 turns. and 4 turns. So they are quite a long cooldown. Also, I think there's another thing here. Whenever an enemy skill does not activate because they are under a fear or true fear, they get a provoke. This particular effect only applies when Kaja is on the same team. So that's really strong because essentially you always force the enemy in wave content to attack Timit the Fool. Timit the Fool is always going to be the target if that is the case, so long as there is true fears available on the enemy team. And this is quite a long cooldown, so you'd probably have to put another fear champion with him, someone like a Mashaled, or someone who can like apply fear on passive, like a miscreated monster. There are other fear champions as well, like Fortis would work pretty well into this. It's like a very strong tanky team. Kaja the Wry gets a lot from Timit. Timit gets a fairly good value from Kaja the Wry. He becomes a much more viable arena nuker when Kaja the Wry is on the team because he gets that guaranteed chance of doing 2 attacks. And you can, if you want to, just run no accuracy instead and run him as a raw nuker. So should you go for Kaja the Wry? Well, it just depends what you want. If you don't have many revivers, then Kaja the Wry for 20 sacreds is probably a good idea. We also don't know what content is coming in the next major content piece, so perhaps these 2 pairings are very good with the skill sets that they do in terms of that fearing and provoking. The provoke there isn't really going to help you for Hydra because you can't fear the heads, so there's no way that you can actually activate that provoke, so that doesn't really work. But in wave content, it's pretty strong, I think. So let's get into the math. How much would you need to do in order to complete the deck of fates? So the first thing I want to talk about is the change of opportunities of getting 3 in a row. As I mentioned earlier in the video, they've taken it from 10 epics to 6 epics and moved all of those into the common cards. That means now we've got 7 possible triple combinations of common instead of 5. And the odds of us pulling one of those common cards has gone up to 53%. So basically, you got more often than not, you're going to pull a common card when you flip a card. That means the odds of pulling 3 common cards in a row is 15% or 14.47%. So it's a very strong, it's a good possibility you can get 3 greens in a row. It's not guaranteed, it's still only 14%, but it's pretty high. But look at the difference of epic. There used to be 3 possible combinations with 1 spare. So you'd basically have a 25% chance whenever you flipped a card, a 1 in 4 chance that it would be an epic card. That is now only 2 possible combinations, and you have basically a 15% chance. So they've nuked a good percentage. They've taken about 10% out of the chances of pulling 1 card. But when it comes to the odds and probabilities of pulling 3 cards in a row, that's now 1.56%. What it used to be is now 0.34%. You have less than 0.5% chance on average, if we talk about probability math, of getting 3 epics in a row. And it's just a little bit egregious. I mean, it was already pretty difficult. Now you've just made it near enough impossible. And you've basically kind of like, you flipped it into an extreme gambling edge now. It's kind of like, if you get really, really lucky and you high roll, congratulations, you get something that no one else does. I don't like that model. I think it's a little bit unfair. If you're going to do this, then you need to make it so that it doesn't have to be 3 in a row. That when you flip a card, you can like track the progress of epic so that everyone in this event gets 2 possible triple combinations. If you want to do that, you can also reduce the reward quality a little bit if you feel like, you know, giving everyone 2 Eternal Soul Stones potentially is too much. You can kind of change the odds and the rewards a little bit. But I would rather guarantee myself a chance at something rather than have a 0.34% of a chance that I might get myself something. I might not even get something good out of that chest. You know, someone can still walk away with an Eternal Soul Stone and the other person walk away with 1,000 energy, right? It's still not like it's amazing to pull one of these epics. You've got to roll the actual dice once you get the epic. It's just too many dice rolls for me, and I really just don't like that system. But they've really nuked it, this one. It is right down to 0.34%. It's really bad. I think they need to revisit this because I think that is just too far for me, personally. Anyway, let's have a look at the dungeons. As I mentioned, the old rates have changed. It used to be 55, 44, 44, 33. You can see on average, they've pretty much taken around about 44 to 45% of the points out of dungeon divers. They're forcing you to summon. They don't want you to get these pumpkins by doing dungeon divers. They want you to summon shards. This is why they've changed this. It does mean that the cost of doing the dungeon divers is significant if that's the only way you want to do it. You're going to have to summon for this. Now, in terms of summoning, I've mapped in the actual single shard summons. So you can see you get 800 for a primal shard. I think this is the first deck of fates with the primal shards. It's 800, 2000 for a sacred. So we can actually look at this and we can go, okay, if we want to guarantee ourselves, right? If we want to, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to pull all 20, but if you want to guarantee yourself Kaja the Wry, the most you're looking to pull is 20 sacreds, 50 primals, 114 voids, and 308 ancient shards, or 40,000 mysteries if you want to go crazy and do it that way. That is the worst case scenario. There is a possibility that you only spend 10 sacreds to get yourself 20 flips, and in those 20 cards you find all the different fragments required for Kaja the Wry. It doesn't mean you have to pull everyone. One thing we don't know is how those Kaja the Wry fragments are broken up, into what capacity. Are they 4 chunks of 25? Or are they 10 chunks of 10? Are they 20 chunks of 5? We really don't know how they've broken it up, and that could have a significant impact in terms of how this works. So let's take a look at the analysis here. Let's just take a look at the dungeon divers. As I mentioned, the shards are pretty straightforward. Just do the simple math of 40,000 divided by 2,000 is 20, and vice versa. I will say probably if you can mix it up a little bit. Like, we just had a summon rush, so sacreds, like, I only have 3 left. I don't know if anyone else has any more. It's very difficult to do. Primals will give you a good amount, but there is really no, like, opportunity. Like, there's times 10s, but there's no times 2 with primals, so I don't really know whether that's worth pulling for. The voids are not too bad, but you need a lot of them. I guess it really depends on what you want to summon for if you want to do it that way. But in terms of dungeon divers, as I mentioned, if you want to do this via dungeon divers, be prepared to spend a lot of energy. We are talking, if you want to do it in the most efficient way, which is normally stage 20, because that is the least amount of runs with the least amount of energy, you're talking 42,666 energy on average you're going to need to spend to get the guaranteed champion. That is about 2,667 runs. That is a hell of a lot of energy. We're talking somewhere in the region of around about 328 refills. That is around about 13,000 gems to get yourself Kaja the Wry if you want to do it via dungeon divers. Now, obviously, most people will go, well, I'll just pull some sacreds. That should offset it a little bit. But it's still quite a lot. Like, if you pull 5 sacreds, that's only giving you 10,000. That's giving you 10 card flips. You're still going to need to go and get yourself 32,000 energies worth of dungeon divers. So you can offset it, but essentially, if you want to do this, you're going to have to summon shards in some capacity or some form, in some combination. Now, there is also going to be a special summoning event going on right now. There is 2. Today, it is Jorgid the Breaker, probably one of the best, if not the best, attack-based nuker in the game for Arena. You're looking at really as top-tier Arena nukers right now as Jorgid, Leorius, and Rotus as attack-based. And then, obviously, you have Taras as a non-attack-based, as HP-based. Those are the kind of like the nukers that are really kind of winning at the moment. So Jorgid is someone worth pulling for if you don't have him. Candrathon is also used quite a lot. He is not a bad arena nuker option either, but he does benefit from being paired with someone who can veil like a Duchess, just to keep him fully veiled up. And he does have affinity issues fighting into Spirit, which can be a problem because Duchess is Spirit and there are a bunch of Spirit champions as well. So it's questionable, but if you haven't got these nukers, they are worth pulling for. So if you're going for Kaja and this, you might double down and you might get lucky. It is only a times 10 though, so for the times 10 void, it's pretty good, but they do keep watering down that times 10, the void legendary pool. They keep adding more void legendaries, right? We've had 2 in the last patch, so that pool of champions gets harder and harder to get what you want. Times 10 for these is fairly negligible. It doesn't really improve your odds that much. The one tomorrow might be more interesting for people. Tomorrow, there's going to be a times 10 for Valkanen from Void Shards, and then from Ancient, Primal, and Sacreds, there will be a Prince Kaimar. So if I'm going for this, I'm going to be summoning it tomorrow because I don't have a Prince Kaimar, and he unlocks so many options. It is kind of crazy. So it'll be like my 1400th attempt at trying to get a Kaimar from a times 10 probably, but we'll see what happens. And then finally on Wednesday, there is a Hegemon times 10 and an Ultimate Death Knight. I would not be summoning on day 3. Hegemon is so far outside of the meta now. At best, he's used as like a tag team champion. He's not really used in any other places. Some people use him in Dark Fate. Some people do use him in Live Arena as like forcing a ban because people don't know what to deal with him. So he does still have a little bit of usage, but he's kind of been forced out of the meta with Stone Skin and Bolster and all these other sets that kind of just like force him out of the meta. Debuffs are not really that good anymore because of Polymorph, so he's really difficult to make work. And Ultimate Death Knight, most people have him for free. I wouldn't be necessarily summoning more shards for him. If you're after a +4, maybe for your classic arena plat team, then you can go for it. But I don't really think he's necessarily worth summoning for. Definitely either summon it today if you want Nukas, tomorrow if you want more support champions in that Prince Kaimar. So there you go, guys. Deck of Fates, guaranteed champion. My personal opinion is I would always go for a champion if it's available to me in a guaranteed setting. There's so few champions now, or so few situations in the game where you can guarantee you can walk away with something. This is a known quantity. If you've got 20 Sacred Shards, you know you're walking away with at least a legendary champion, and that is better than a ×2 odds 9 times out of 10. There's no guarantee even on ×2 Sacred you're going to walk away with it. We are in the fusion, the Summon Rush is completed, so you can technically burn your Sacred Shards because the champion chase is pretty much about ancient shards. It's about epics more than anything else. That's how you climb the champion chase. If you have been doing every single of the fusion events as well, you don't actually need to do all of the champion chase. So you could even get away with just pulling some fragment champions and not even need to use shards for that champion chase, which means you can get the fusion and this Kaja the Wry in one kind of sitting. So I would always suggest to people, if you've got the shards sitting there available, guaranteed champions are always worth going for. I wouldn't necessarily buy Sacred Shards for this champion. If you need the Kaimar though, Kaimar is worth going for because he's such a strong champion. I will be trying to go for the Kaimar. I'll probably pull my Sacreds. I'll probably pull my Primals tomorrow just to try and get the Kaimar. I know it's not great odds, but it's better than not getting it at all. There's very few opportunities that would benefit me pulling any other non-void legendary, so I might as well go for the Kaimar. It's the best opportunity I'm going to have unless they put it in a Prism system in the future. There you go, guys. That is the Deck of Fates. Let me know in the comments below, are you going to go for Kaja the Wry? Do you think it's a good champion? I'm a bit like, it's a decent champion, but it's nothing groundbreaking. Probably do a follow-up video tomorrow where I actually summon my shards and flip it and see if we get lucky. And we'll see what happens. But there you go, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.